listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer, Ellie Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. Michael, how we doing today? I mean, this has been a fun weekend for me. I was out in Oxnard at Dallas Cowboys training camp, was able to watch Friday and Saturday practice. We got full notes from those two practices, but how we doing? How was the weekend treating you?
We're good, but I think more than anything today, Femi, as we enter this Monday, this is finally, we are in game week, which will continue all the way through February. So I love that. I love the sound of that. And I am so excited for this A block here to get 4-game Femi to tell us all about the Dallas Cowboys, what you saw, what you think, what you hear, what do you say, what do you know, all that stuff. I want to hear it all. I'm disappointed that Jerry didn't have you up in the tower with him, but
we were not up there.
You need to focus and concentrate, So, first of all, let's start off with the main. Were there fans there, Femi?
There were. So that was an interesting kind of thing that I was like going into it. I was wondering, all right, what's it going to be like? What's the energy going to be like? So we went on Friday. I drove over after we did the pod Thursday, made the drive over to Oxnard, and we're hanging out there. So they had an off day Thursday, and I didn't get in until in the afternoon, so I had to miss practice anyways. So it worked out perfectly in that regard. But leading into Friday morning, I was like, I wonder, because everyone's been tweeting about how there's no fans at Dallas Cowboys training camp this year, and fans are a little bit more apathetic to the team, and nobody really knows if they want to be excited about this team upcoming in 2024. But Friday, I would say it was probably a medium-sized crowd. We had a decent amount of space. We hung out in the bleachers, so we had the early entrance. We paid for the early entrance fee because I wanted to get a good spot. But most people that did the early entrance, they ran up to the fence because they want to high-five the players, get the autographs, take the photos, do all those things. I was like, that's cool, but I actually want to be able to watch practice. So we wanted to get to the 50-yard line to where we can be perched up a little bit and be able to have a good look. It was me, my older brother, and then my dad. So we did it as a retire. My dad retired early this year, so my brother and I decided, hey, we should all go to Cowboys training camp as a retirement gift for my father, because hey, that's how I became a Cowboys fan. He's the one that infected me with this virus as we were watching games as a kid, and we've obviously grown into adulthood now, and we've always been Cowboys fans ever since then. So we got our spot, and we're watching practice in medium-sized crowd. We have a decent amount of space. Friday practice, a lot of special teams work in the early portion, which is a lot of practice. They start off with special team stuff. You see the O-line off to the other field. The D-line was off to the corner on the side, on the left side of us. We're watching some of that stuff. Eventually, they started to do some one-on-one drills. Parsons did a little bit of one-on-one stuff. He was more limited on Friday because he was dealing with some elbow thing. I didn't know that until I was checking Twitter. I was like, why isn't Parsons doing more stuff in the team period and all that? Eventually, it was reported that he was dealing with an elbow that McCarthy said that he wasn't really concerned about moving forward, but we saw some of the one-on-one drills and those types of things, and eventually they get into the mojo moments, is what McCarthy calls them, mojo moments. They're playing the Sunday night music, the Sunday night football music and everything, and they get people fired up, and it's 4th and goal situation. Dak was able to convert a touchdown in the situation, so Dak, he looked like Dak, as he usually does, really good, and obviously he was much in control of the offense. Got to see Trey Lance a little bit, some of the stuff that we talked about with Broadus. That was true from what I saw from Trey Lance. I want to see him more in a game environment, more so than anything than practice. But I think Trey Lance still has some work to do. Cooper Rush is right now the quarterback 2 for the Cowboys based on what I saw and based on how they're kind of rotating guys in and out. I think he and Lance, maybe they're in a battle, but if it is a battle, I think Rush certainly has the upper hand on Trey Lance. Maybe you'd have to close the gap during the actual games. But Saturday, I would say, though, Michael, was the day that there was a lot more energy, probably because if it's a weekend, people in Southern California didn't have to work because practice is at 11 in the morning. You would have to taken off work, I guess, if you were living there. But a lot of people Saturday morning for sure. That was more so what Cowboys training camp had looked like in the past. High energy, even more team period. And it felt like, I was like, man, they're really practicing for a long time, because Friday was about hour 45. Saturday felt like 2 hours and 15 minutes. A lot of team period, though, which was a lot of fun. Parsons was involved in that. He was kind of getting the crowd going, got a couple sacks on Dak. Got to see the new Mike Zimmer defense, the double A gap looks, all of Zimmer's classic stuff. He was running that. He fooled Dak on a couple of those. So I would say that it was pretty good. There was some good back and forth, because I was thinking back to what we were talking about last week about how hey, when the offense is doing really well, it's a little bit concerning defensively. And they had a 2-minute drill period. Dak starts it off, boom, hits a nice ball over to Brandon Cooks over the top. And it's like everyone's cheering because people think about the offense first. Everyone's like, yeah, let's go. And I was like, that was a little bit too easy for this offense. Like, let's go. Let's get this defense in line. And obviously they're a little bit shorthanded. No Diggs out there. Kendricks is working on the resistance bands. Guys who are going to be starting and playing a lot of snaps were not out there on the field, but they had a good amount of those defenders that were playing. But the defense eventually got them back. Michael Parsons was able to sack Dak on a couple of plays, so it was some good back and forth stuff. But overall, I'd say that, that's kind of what I expected going in about this team. They have good players. They're going to be a good team. McCarthy's a good coach, or at least he's good enough to win in the regular season, to where, like, I don't think that there was any sort of, like, glaring, eye-opening, like, oh my goodness, this is going to be bad, or oh my goodness, this is going to be really good. It's just kind of what I thought it was. My one disappointment, though, as I kind of wrap up my Cowboys mailbag here, is that Tyler Guyton, the first-round pick, he was dealing with an illness, so we didn't get to see him on Friday or Saturday. I was really, he was honestly the player that I was most looking forward to watching. Right. Unfortunately, he wasn't out there on the practice field since he was dealing with the illness, but a lot of people said he's been looking great in training camp. I wanted to see it for my own eyes. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that. He's supposed to be on the practice field back today on this Monday. But all in all, a fun trip with me, my dad, my brother, and we enjoyed it. And then we're going to make it a new tradition. We're going to go out to Cowboys training camp every year as much as we can do it. I
love it. All right, so let's go. I got some questions.
Yep.
Running back. Obviously Zeke's the short yardage back. Dowdle, or what did Deuce Vaughn look like? Did he kind of jump off?
So he did not practice either day. He was working on resistance bands as well. So he didn't have the pads on. He had the jersey on and stuff and was doing some of the stretch work, but he didn't really practice. Zeke is still the number one running back as far as I'm concerned from what they were doing rotation wise. Dowdle's going to be kind of like a 1A, 1B situation, at least from what I saw those two practices. Dowdle's still much in the mix. Davis, he gets a little bit of carries, but I think that's going to be more so as a third running back. But I'm curious to see how they use Deuce Vaughn. I would imagine he's going to be used in the return game, in addition to Kevontae Turpin, who they have as a returner the past couple of years. But it feels like it's Zeke and Rico Dowdle as a 1A, 1B at running back.
And how about the wide receiver? Obviously, Cooks is good. We know Lamb's not there, but did Turbin do anything, or Tolbert, their second or third round pick in 22, or anybody there jump out to you? Kelvin Harmon, the kid that was an Indiana player, went to Washington. He's bounced around the league quite a bit. Anybody jump out at receiver that you said, maybe this guy could be a fourth special teams player?
So Tolbert's sort of been the talk of camp since CeeDee Lamb has not been there, and the talk in the bleachers is definitely about CeeDee Lamb. From talking to a lot of Cowboys fans, everyone say, let's get CeeDee Lamb done. The Tyreek Hill news, the Hill news, which we'll talk about a little bit later on the podcast, that broke while we were all sitting, and everyone's like, oh, Tyreek just got paid. He got a restructure. Now we got to see how this works out for CeeDee Lamb. Everyone's missing Lamb not being there. But I know a guy that a lot of people have been talking about, and he didn't really flash a ton in the 2 days that we were there, but Tyron Billy Johnson, we'll see if he eventually is kind of like a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 in that special teams role. Tolbert, I thought, looked solid. Based on how people were talking about him, I thought I would have seen a little bit more from Jalen Tolbert, but we saw him a little bit last season, started to kind of make some of those steps forward as a player. Now this is year 3 for him. Maybe he can make another step forward, but he was he was running in like that X spot that CeeDee Lamb typically would be in, and he and Dak have a pretty good chemistry since they've been working together all throughout camp. But I thought he was, I would say, solid. He wasn't really eye-opening, being like, oh, okay, like now we're cooking with something here. But I'd say he was solid, which is, at camp, I guess that's pretty good.
So when you look at the team, right, and when you evaluate this, we know how good they were offensively, how they were able to play from in front, and they were able to control the pace of the game, took a lot of their pressure off their defensive front in terms of being able to not stop the run, because we know they struggled in the 5 losses. 4 of those 5 teams ran the football effectively. Only Miami didn't. So you got to feel like, can they maintain that level of offensive excellence, especially in the first half? And I think when you look at it, I think that's got to be the one thing you have to kind of say, I'm not sure, do they have enough weapons? One of the main questions we had going in is, can they handle good fronts on the road in their offensive line? Well, we couldn't see the first round pick. Second question is, who fills the Tony Pollard role? We're still not sure about that, right? They scored 296 points in the first half last year. Who's going to, how are they going to be as good as they were last year? But more than anything, 4 of their 6 losses, they gave up 266, 222, 170, and 143 on the ground. So can they do that? I think those are still, after you come back from Thousand Oaks, there's still questions that I don't know if you've answered.
No, and those are questions that I still had watching practice. Like there were some moments there where the offense, all right, here's 5 yards, here's 6 yards on the ground game, and it's like, okay, like we would like to see the run defense look a little bit more stout. Mozzie Smith, I think, will be a little bit better in the run defense. He's never really going to be a guy that's going to provide you much from a pass rush standpoint. I think that was pretty clear from watching the couple of days of training camp, but it feels like he's a little bit better handling those double teams, which is really why he wasn't on the field much last year. It's like, you're a big body guy. We need you to kind of take on those guys to free up some of these fast linebackers. But I mean, they're just, and then maybe it's the modern game, but they're so small at linebacker. DeMarvion Overshown, the guy who he had a torn ACL last year would have been his rookie season. He didn't play. He's back out there, fast as can be, really fast, easy mover. But you look at him, it's like, man, this looks like a safety from about 20, 25 years ago. Yeah. But that's kind of the new NFL. But yeah, I think the run defense will still be a question. Zimmer, I mean, he has to work with what he has. A lot of these guys were picked out by the previous defensive coordinator, Dan Quinn, who's now in Washington, and he likes those run hit factor guys that can get to the ball and fly to the football. So we'll have to kind of work around that. I'm curious to see what it looks like with Eric Kendricks in there. I know Kendricks is a little bit older, doesn't run like he used to be able to run, but at least from a knowledge standpoint, he has a lot of knowledge of that defense given their time together in Minnesota. So maybe it looks a little bit better when he's back in the lineup, and maybe they're able to go with heavier boxes when Trayvon Diggs comes back. If you can say, Diggs, can you go on an island and kind of cover a guy, maybe that can help things out, because I do think that hurt them a lot last year, not having Trayvon Diggs on the back end. But Deron Bland, I mean, he looked like Deron Bland. He looked actually pretty good, made some nice plays on the ball. No interceptions, but he was actually making some nice pass breakups. I would say one guy that stood out at tight end, in addition to Jake Ferguson being really good, is Peyton Hendershot, who was a part of the tight end rotation last year. He made a couple of nice plays, especially in the red zone. So maybe they can go a couple of tight ends. You get Lamb back in there. Hopefully the offense, at least the passing game, doesn't have too much of a drop-off from what we saw a season ago.
When we come back, I have more questions after we get done the break.
Yeah, and we will talk about a lot of other stuff. This is not just going to be a Dallas Cowboys-centric podcast. We have Tyreek Hill news, Justin Herbert news, obviously dealing with the plantar fascia over there at Los Angeles Chargers camp, as well as many other NFL headlines. But we'll empty more of the Dallas Cowboys training camp mailbag on the other side. This is the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
We're rolling along here on the GM Shuffle, presented by Smirnoff. We do game days. Please drink responsibly. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York, here as we're going ahead and emptying the mailbag from my 2-day visit to Dallas Cowboys training camp. Watch practice Friday and Saturday this past weekend over in Oxnard. Michael, what else do you want to know from a Cowboys camp? Like I said, didn't get to hang out at the tower with Jerry and Stephen Jones, but we had a pretty good view nonetheless in the bleachers.
Well, Marshawn Nealon, the kid they drafted from Western Michigan in the second round, I mean, they need him to be a good player because DeMarcus Lawrence last year was not. I mean, DeMarcus Lawrence wasn't anything what we expected or what we've seen from him in the past. So my question is, did you notice anything from Lawrence? Did he look like a better player, or did he look like he hit a wall and he's not going to bounce back? The thing is, he had 4.5 sacks last year, more alarming, and it could have been injury. We don't know, but he only had 10 quarterback hits all season.
It feels like he's sort of dipped in the production from a pass rush standpoint. Like his run defense is still really good, what he can do as a run defender, but as a pass rusher, definitely is not the guy that we saw in 2016, 17, 18, those kind of DeMarcus Lawrence seasons. But he looked like how he usually looks, to be quite honest. He didn't practice on Saturday. He took a vet day. He was still out there helping out some of the young pass rushers. But on Friday, during the one-on-ones, I thought he was fine. They were doing a lot of stuff, working on some of those tackle end games, doing some of those things that they usually run on the defensive line. But I thought he was kind of normal, like what he usually looks like. I wouldn't expect him to be the DeMarcus Lawrence of yesteryears, my guess is probably going to be more of what we saw a season ago, to where you need some other guys to step up, like a Marshawn Kneeland, who Marshawn Kneeland, that's a square body guy, which is interesting to see at the edge rusher standpoint. They're like square, like he's not one of those like linear pass rusher guys, like a Randy Gregory type that you see with the like he is
more James Harrison,
more like a James Harrison, like a stout square body kind of a player. But he actually had a couple of good flashes there, the rookie. So I'm curious to see. I mean, it's tough for those rookie edge guys to really make massive impact in year one, unless you're like a special player, like a Bosa or a Parsons or a Watt. Those are the only guys that usually impact as rookie edge rushers. But he's actually going to be in the rotation because they need him. Dorrance Armstrong's in Washington. Dante Fowler, he's in Washington. They're with Dan Quinn. So they're going to need guys like that to step up, especially with Sam Williams last week suffering the torn ACL and being out for the season.
Yeah, no question. Look, if they, remarkable, they scored 296 points in the first half without Kellen Moore. I don't know how they did it, but they did, and they had a 124-point differential, which is the most important stat in all of football. Mm-hmm. And, for Mike McCarthy, for all the crap that he takes, he's got a 62% winning percentage there as the Dallas Cowboys head coach. And in the fourth quarter, where a lot of teams have faded, this team, the Cowboys, outscored their opponent 144-67, which is remarkable. And that's why they were able to kind of run away. But for Dallas, all that matters is playoff time. And, when I was at the Raiders, Bill Callahan was the head coach. We went to the playoff. We went to the Super Bowl his first year. He had a 4-year contract. Most people on planet Earth would have, he had a 2-year deal plus 2-year option deal. And had you gone to the Super Bowl in your first year as a head coach, most owners would have picked up the 2 years on the option.
Yep. We
didn't. Al Davis made him a lame duck. And it drove everybody in the building crazy. Now, we were older team declining. It was over with for us. We couldn't really match, and it was a disastrous year, and he ended up getting fired at the end of the year. But, I think a lot of it was that lame duck. There was no way to build a sustainable program when you're on this lame duck status. And when I look at, I worry about that for McCarthy. I worry about that for Zimmer and the staff, because if they lose a game, it's hard to kind of, where's my security? You're looking around like, wait a minute, this is over with. And then you become a substitute teacher, even though you're full-time, right? Even though you're full-time in the building, the players look at you like you're a substitute teacher. They're going to be somebody else coaching us. That's what worries you when you don't have that job security. And then I don't understand the whole Lamb thing, because, we saw, Femi, that, when you were down there scouting, Tyreek Hill gets the huge deal, which you mentioned when you saw that. Yep. They added guaranteed money to his deal. Okay, that's fine. DJ Moore got a huge deal, $27 million, which to me, once DJ Moore deal got done, I don't know why Brandon Ayuk's deal didn't get done, because I'm telling you, Brandon Ayuk isn't better than DJ Moore. He's just not. Now, Brandon Ayuk's played on better teams, but DJ Moore's played for no quarterbacks. He's had to do it the hard way. I don't know what Ayuk is asking for, but it sounds like he's asking for the moon and the stars, because the deals should be done. And it's the same thing with CeeDee Lamb. I mean, the deals are there on the table. I don't understand how come they're not getting done. I don't understand the reluctance of the Cowboys to make a deal. I don't know what's happening. Are they just going to tear it down to build it back up? I mean, there's something more than meets the eye here. It just doesn't make sense. When you have this many deals done in the open market, if the player's being unreasonable, maybe Lamb wants to make more. Maybe he's waiting for Chase's deal. I don't know. The Ayuk one to me is ridiculous, because Ayuk, let's face it, he's not better than some of these guys who've already got deals in. He's just not. He's had a good year last year, but he scored 25 touchdowns in his NFL career. I mean, he's had 2 good years, 4 decent seasons, but at some point do a short-term deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned DJ Moore. Last year was his 4th 1,000-yard receiving season, and you think about the quarterbacks that he was playing with the Carolina Panthers in his 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year in the league. It wasn't very pretty. It wasn't like the Niners had a quarterback last season, that's for sure. And it goes back to what you mentioned with CeeDee Lamb and what's taken so long. That's why I've been so interested in this whole Dak Prescott deal, which maybe that plays out into March. But I feel like that's the first domino that has to sort of fall for the Cowboys to then fit in a Lamb deal and a Parsons deal. I feel like they want to know what the team looks like under the Dak contract first before they do all this stuff. Even though Lamb is holding out now and it's kind of trying to force the issue to get paid right now, if you're the Cowboys, don't you want to know what Dak is going to be accounting for on the cap before you do anything else?
Well, I mean, I think they should know what it is, right? I mean, they're kind of trapped by Dak. I mean, he's got $29 million in base salary. You could really, between Dak and Lawrence, there's $39 million, and Lamb's at $17 million. I mean, they could pick up substantial cap room. Not that they're going to use it on anybody, but remember, they could book that cap room from this year into next year, which would help them tremendously. But they don't seem to have that motivation to want to do that. I don't understand it. I mean, next year you could take Brandon Cooks off the cap. You could take a bunch of guys off, and then you could get these deals done. There's a way to handle it. Whereas Philly is very aggressive in the marketplace to get deals done. Yeah. Dallas isn't. And it just doesn't there's something here that doesn't. It isn't like they are cash poor. Trust me. No. I mean, they're the Berkshire Hathaway of the NFL. They got plenty of cash.
And they don't really spend a lot of it.
No, they don't. They don't. They hold back, and I wonder. Jerry was very hard on the hiring the assistant coaches. He didn't really want to do that. I mean, 2 years ago they got rid of a bunch of coaches that they thought were overpaid. I mean, it's almost like if you didn't know better, they were kind of getting some sorts of fiscal responsibility within the building. I don't know, but I don't know why the Ayuk one bothers me because he's not better than DJ Moore. And DJ Moore just did a deal. At some point, if you're the 49ers, wait a second. You're not better than DJ Moore. He just signed for $27 a year. Now, maybe the Niners aren't offering him $27 a year. I don't know. Well, but to me, there seems to be a deal to be made for Lamb, and it seems to be a deal to be made for Ayuk that I don't understand why this hasn't happened. This is the confusing part. Usually when this happens, the players are asking for something completely ridiculous.
Well, what's interesting is that we saw earlier this week, and I saw this on my timeline this morning as I was getting ready to prep for the podcast, but Matt Mayoko, who we had on the Lombardi line earlier this offseason, he covers the 49ers out there for NBC Sports Bay Area, and he was pretty adamant that Ayuk's not going to get traded, but has now since changed his tune and tweeted yesterday saying, "I've stated for a while that I didn't see any scenario in which the 49ers would trade Brandon Ayuk. Now, I believe it's a legitimate option. In a lot of ways, the ball is in Ayuk's court." Do you think that there could be some trade talks that kind of pick back up with 49ers and maybe some other teams? I know Pittsburgh's the team that everyone's been talking about, but could there be maybe another team that's interested in acquiring Brandon Ayuk at the price that he apparently is asking for, which is probably north of $30 million? Otherwise, this thing would have been done by now.
Yeah, I think the Niners have had basically said we can't get a deal. This guy's not worth it, so let's explore it. The Niner uniform is. I know this is going to shock a lot of people, but the Niners are going to continue on without Brandon Ayuk. Life is going to go on without him, just like life goes on without all of us. The uniform stays. I think if I were John Lynch, I would either say, Brendan, you're either taking this deal, or I would be more. And I've been one of the people that said no. They're not. But Pearsall's practiced the last few days. Mm-hmm. Maybe they feel he could be an outside guy. They got Debo for next year at $17 million. None of it's guaranteed. So, if the guy won't take the deal and he's being unrealistic in his deal, then ask him to go out. And if somebody's willing to pay Brandon Ayuk $30 million a year on a deal, you're really, we've seen so many of these receiver deals that haven't worked out for the team trading for him. We've seen so many of them. Now, A.J. Brown worked out for Philly, but we've seen some that haven't.
Yeah, Devontae Adams hasn't worked out for the Raiders.
No, of course it hasn't, and so I think to me, I would say, okay, fine. We'll live with Debo. We'll live with Pearsall. I don't know if we'll be good enough on the outside, but we've got plenty of cap room now. We can't make the guy take the deal. And you have to be disciplined enough to say, I'm not spending any more for Brandon Ayuk when I know who he is. He's a good player, but let's be very clear here. He's a replaceable player. Now, that doesn't mean to be harsh. That means he's a good player, but there's other guys like him in the marketplace. You see, what you're saying here is I don't want to fall in love. This is what kills cap. It's one of the reasons why the Giants are in the mess they're in. They can't wait to fall in love. They send roses to everybody. They just want to. I mean, we'll get to this later, but John Mara's still in love with the contract that he gave Daniel Jones. You can't fall in love. And so when you don't fall in love, you're willing to step back and say, okay, right, I'm not paying you that. Here you go. Right? Here you go. And I'll sign player Y. I mean, if Bill Walsh were in the building and if they were listening to his sounds off the walls, that's what he would be telling them to do. And life's going to go on without Ayuk. It is. We drafted him. We made him into a good player. He's had 4 good years. He's not better than DJ Moore. Why would we pay him more than DJ Moore? It's a competitive disadvantage for us to do that.
Can they win the Super Bowl in 2024 without Brandon Ayuk?
I mean, we could find out. I mean, we could find out. I mean, he's not tilting. It ain't Tyreek Hill here, Femi. He ain't tilting the meter in their favor. People don't drive to the stadium up for Highway 101 saying, oh, my God, we got to play Brandon Ayuk today. What are we going to do? Oh, my God, what are we going to do? When they play Tyreek Hill, they cry. But they don't cry on Ayuk.
Yeah, well, that's why Tyreek Hill got a new deal worth $90 million over the next 3 years. We'll break down more of these contracts and more of the NFL headlines on the other side of the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
We're getting rolling here on the GM Shuffle, but before we continue, I wanted to give a quick shout out to one of our loyal listeners. I hope he doesn't mind me using his name, but on Twitter, Thomas Casey gave me a couple of recommendations for restaurants to try when I was down in Oxnard, and we took advantage of the lunch spot, Fisherman's Catch. They serve some really good fish and chips, so we had that for lunch after Friday practice. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Thomas there because we enjoyed it. It was a really good recommendation. The fish and chips were exquisite as we enjoyed those after practice. But let's get to Tyreek Hill, because not only did he get the nice contract readjustment, $90 million over the next 3 years, $65 million in guaranteed money, he also learned that the NFL players voted him number 1, the top player in the league, after the top 100 that they do every single season. He was number 1. Lamar Jackson, the reigning MVP, number 2. Christian McCaffrey, the reigning Offensive Player of the Year, number 3. Patrick Mahomes, the reigning Super Bowl MVP, at number 4, and then Myles Garrett, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, at number 5. But what was your reaction to Tyreek Hill being the number 1 player in the National Football League when I think a lot of people thought it was going to be Patrick Mahomes?
Well, I mean, I don't know. Look, I think Tyreek Hill's dynamic, but when Lamar's ahead of Patrick Mahomes, something's wrong here. And you know I love Lamar. Mm-hmm. I've been in Lamar's camp since he was in college. I voiced my opinion against him, against trying to make him a receiver. I have been on Team Lamar from the start. But you can't put a guy who's got 3 Super Bowl trophies on his manual behind a guy who can't win a playoff game. You just can't do it. So it almost becomes this whole top 100 becomes null and void because of the stupidity of one thing. Like, you can't have that. Now, all of a sudden, it implies there's bias within the voting. Mahomes is number 1. Now, Tyreek Hill can be number 2. I got no problem with that, because I was arguing that Tyreek Hill was the best receiver in football 3 years ago when Pro Football Focus had him as like the 8th receiver, right? Remember, we got on that. I was going berserk off that. I mean, I couldn't believe it. So, you know, like, nobody puts fear of God into a team more than Tyreek. Why? Because he's got that rare speed that no one can defend, and he's got rare lateral quickness that no one can defend, and he's got power. So he's a combination of Randy Moss, Barry Sanders wrapped up into one.
Crazy.
And it's hard. Look, he's gotten 1,700 yards the last 2 years. And everybody knows he's a target. And as the game has expanded into RPOs and where it's caught, you know, it's really helped him. Now, in fairness, and I want to be very clear here, you know, they traded him for a lot. He traded 5 picks for him. Mm-hmm. And all those picks have benefited the Kansas City Chiefs and why they've won 2. So as great as Tyreek Hill is, as great as he is, let's go back to what you asked me about Brandon Ayuk. Can you win a title without him? I think the Chiefs have proven that as great as Tyreek Hill, they can win titles without him.
Yeah, you got to be fiscally responsible with this sort of stuff, and eventually you have to have. And that's, as a Cowboys fan, I kind of feel the same about CeeDee Lamb.
Well, you could be like Danny O and just give away all the money. I mean, you know, like give away. Oh, yes, you got to pay this guy. You got to pay this guy. I mean, you know,
how do we work for Danny O? Give us pay raises.
Yeah, I want to work for him. I wouldn't mind being, you know.
It's like, hey, just pay him $3-4 million, whatever. Yeah, just give him the money.
Yeah. I mean, didn't he say the other day that I saw it on McAfee? I wanted to jump back on the show. He said that, the worst trade in the history of football is the Green Bay Packer deal. I mean, with the Jets trading that.
With Rodgers, it's doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I will say this about the top 100 list. So I'm assuming that this is based off of what we saw in the regular season. And maybe it doesn't factor into the postseason because Tyreek Hill being at number one, like when I saw that, I didn't have like a massive problem with it. I think most people because I know Mahomes is the best player for sure, but like the fact that Hill, who last year at times, I thought in the regular season at least, was playing like the best player in the league, despite Lamar winning the MVP. Like Tyreek Hill was the best player in football in the regular season. Now in the postseason, Mahomes did Mahomes things. He leads his team to the Super Bowl, but also we talked about quite a bit, the defense helped lead the Kansas City Chiefs to the Super Bowl as well. It was a collection of Mahomes being great in the moments when he needed to be great and the defense being great all throughout it. So I wasn't as outraged as most people as Mahomes not being number one, even though I know he's the best player in the league. Like if you're starting a team, you're picking Mahomes before anybody else and you're not thinking twice about it. But Tyreek Hill, I think it was cool that they acknowledged the regular season that he had because during the regular season, I think Tyreek Hill was actually the best player in all of football. But that's my rant there on the top 100 list. The Hall of Fame game, Michael, we also saw that over the weekend. And unfortunately, we didn't see all four quarters. Obviously, the weather went ahead and cut that thing short. It ended up being about 2.5 quarters of play. The Bears ultimately beat the Texans 21-17. Prayers to the people went ahead and bet the over. Those tickets were 100% going to cash until the weather came in and stepped in and said, nope, we're not going to play the 55 minutes, so your ticket does not cash. But what were your impressions of the new kickoff rule? Because that was the big change that we knew it was coming, and we'd seen it in the XFL. We'd seen teams practicing, but still when you see it live, it's sort of like a jarring experience because it's not what we're used to.
Yeah, I didn't like it at all. I thought to me that, when you watched it, I thought the coverage players were on top of the blockers. It was hard. I think it's going to be hard to officiate because everybody can't move until the ball's kicked. That's hard to kind of see. I think there's going to have to be some tweaks to it. I really do. But I don't think that they've eliminated. I said this back when they put the rule in. I don't think they've eliminated the high-speed collisions with the returner. I don't think they have. I still think that's going to be the issue. Look, I hate the fact that we've taken one of the greatest plays in football in terms of strategy out of the game, onside kick.
Yeah. And
so we've taken that away, which pains me. But I still think this has got to get tweaked. It's got to get looked at. It's got to get understood. Just like, there's been a big stink about this motion rule, right? Now, the league says they're not changing the motion rule or the intent of the motion rule, but everybody seems to think they're going to call it differently.
Yeah. These changes, I mean, I get that they want to make the kickoff a more exciting play, but we even saw, I believe, Sean Payton, the Denver Broncos head coach, earlier this weekend talking about how, hey, like, taking a touchback from the 30 is not as punitive as the league thinks it is. And if teams don't really want to deal with this, and maybe they're being penalized for the whole new kickoff rule, maybe this causing more penalties, maybe they just kick it out of the end zone and say, you know what, we'll give you the ball at the 30-yard line, and then we'll figure it out. So it could maybe have an adverse effect of what the league actually wanted, and maybe more teams opt to just kick the ball through the end zone and just give the opposing team the ball at the 30. Because the 25 and the 30 not as massive of a difference as you might think, even though you obviously giving up those 5 yards, making it once now a 70-yard drive for a touchdown versus a 75-yard drive. So, like I said, I'm curious to see how this plays out more as we get more preseason games this weekend. But I think we're not going to really learn what this actually is once we get to the regular season. That's when we'll try to figure it out, and we'll see some of the strategy that happens amongst all these teams in the NFL. Justin Herbert, Michael. Plantar fascia, right foot injury, expected to be ready for the start of the 2024 season, but he's going to be held out at least throughout the entire preseason, a few weeks, has to wear a boot for a couple of weeks. How impactful is this for the Chargers, a team that I think I'm higher on than the market? I think you're higher on them than the market as well, but this is an injury that can linger all throughout the season. Is this going to impact them in 2024?
See, I don't think it'll linger. Now, look, I'm not a doctor, but usually the reason it lingers is because the player wants to keep playing, he gets it injected, which then it subsides for the day, but then it becomes harder to heal. And so you're just trying to buy time with it during the season. Now that the offseason, and he's got really a good month to heal it, I think it should heal. What you don't want to do with plantar fat is inject them, because that's when you go down this road where it's kind of a dead end road. So I don't think it's as much as we think it is. And I think as long as he can get the treatment that he's needed to get it handled, then I think he should be out. Look, I think the Chargers are going to be a lot better. But, every day you're sitting here reading your sports scan, read everything, whatever you're reading.
Yeah.
And you're looking at all these injuries all the time. You just don't know how bad they are. Like, for example, the Rams, right?
Yeah.
3 offensive linemen. Both Jackson, the left side of their line, whether Jonah Jackson, Alaric Jackson. Alaric Jackson, so, and then, Puka Nacua and then Haverstein. So they're going through some injuries there in practice that, they can't really afford going back into Detroit on Sunday night, when Al's with his perfect knot to start the season. So I think you got to be, that this is what you're monitoring. This is where, so for the record here, this is the last week all the scouts will say it's going to be impossible to cut this team. This is the last week the scouts are going to say, we're going to be able to get draft picks for guys we're going to cut. Because once the game starts, all that bullshit about how good you are goes away. And then panic sets in, right? And then panic sets in because, we're not as good as we think. Or that corner that we thought could really cover can't cover like we thought. So I think, to me, this is where reality comes. The rubber meets the road this week. So we'll get a good look at some of this. Now, look, a lot of guys aren't going to play, but that's insignificant. There's certain players you want to watch. Guyton, for example, at Dallas. We want to watch him. The left tackle at the Jets, the kid they drafted in the first round. We need to watch him. So there's certain guys you got to watch.
Yeah, I know we're going to start seeing more joint practices upcoming this week. I know the Cowboys, they're inviting the Rams. The Rams are going to go out there to Oxnard to practice with them because they're going to have the preseason game later on this weekend. So the joint practices, I mean, unfortunately for fans, we don't get to see these live. I will still protest that I will pay money to watch these joint practices if the NFL would let us do that. But as of right now, they're not. But maybe that's an idea for the future for the National Football League. But the preseason, though, will sort of kind of be a little bit more eye-opening for some of these young players that teams at least thought that they could bank on. It's kind of the difference between the card players that we talked about last week and then the players that will play for real. Like, who's actually going to be good, just not when it's looking at a card and here's what you got to do and then go do it. Who's actually going to be able to have success in a game that's a lot more dynamic than the practice environment. You mentioned those injuries that we had. DeAndre Hopkins, another injury for the Tennessee Titans. Hopkins was actually impactful for Tennessee last season, made quite a bit of plays, seemed to have a good relationship with Will Levis, but now this injury, this is probably going to keep him out from the opener for Tennessee. It's supposed to be a 4 to 6 week injury with a knee. With older players, you think maybe you kind of lean more on the latter of it maybe being a 6 week deal here, but for Tennessee, who they think that they can kind of win now around Levis. They brought in a bunch of veteran free agent guys. They brought in more over the weekend. Quandre Diggs, they just signed him over the weekend to reunite him with Jamal Adams in that Seattle secondary. What do you make of this DeAndre Hopkins injury and how it impacts the Titans passing game in that wide receiver room?
Well, it ain't going to slow him down, I can tell you that. He's already slow. So it's not going to be, Hopkins is always covered. He just has incredible balance and incredible eye-hand coordination that makes plays. I think this Titan team is interesting because I'm not sure who they want to be, right? Like every move they're making, signing these veteran guys, they're telling you they think they can compete. They want to improve this team. So, bringing Diggs in, they brought
Ridley.
They signed. They get rid of a safety and the kid they traded to Philadelphia. Now they bring another older safety in Diggs. They've got Hooker in there, So, I think they're trying to say they're going to be real. They want to be good this year. I just don't know how good they're going to be. It'll be interesting to see how this all manifests itself going forward. They got Jamal Adams in there at safety. Yeah. Can you get slower? If he's playing safety, you're slow. You can't cover anybody. You got to be in the box. So it'll be. I'm kind of. I don't know who they want to be. But look, they'll be better in the off. It's all going to come down to Levis. Can he play quarterback? I can't wait to watch him in the preseason.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think it's one of those, like, we talk about how teams' actions speak louder than their words. Both the Titans' words and their actions are sort of indicating that they maybe believe in Will Levis. I don't know if that belief.
They do.
Yeah, I don't know if that belief is justified, but they believe in it, and it's eye-opening to see them kind of invest all of these veteran guys, thinking that, hey, we think we have a quarterback that can win now. Let's go ahead and surround him with some of these veteran guys, and not just make it a young roster that has to develop over time. Let's make it a win now roster. So they're making the bet, and I could tip the cap to them making the bet, but we'll see if the bet comes up good for them in the actual regular season, because they're definitely showing that they have a lot of belief in Will Levis as he enters year 2. Now will be under the tutelage of Brian Callahan as the first year at head coach. Before we get out of here, wanted to get to these quarterback competitions that we have across the National Football League. We were talking about this during the break. The Las Vegas Raiders QB competition. I know the Raiders had an inter-squad scrimmage this past weekend over on Saturday in Costa Mesa. We have Aiden O'Connell and we have Gardner Minshew. What's the latest on what you're hearing and who might be in the lead in this QB competition for the Silver and Black?
I think this is going to go down to the wire. I mean, every day it changes. It's Minshew. I heard it was Aiden O'Connell. I mean, I don't know what to believe, but I think they're going to have to play him. I mean, the concern I keep hearing out of their camp is the offensive line, right? I think that's the concern, and it's hard to evaluate quarterbacks. Now, this week we got the Giants and Detroit. We got a bunch of inter-squad games going on this week before the game, so it'll be fun to watch that. But the Raiders' offensive line, I think they've got a lot of injuries. Colton Miller's still not, so it's hard to evaluate the quarterback without the offensive line in front of him.
An interesting one is happening in Latrobe out there in Pennsylvania with the Pittsburgh Steelers, where Russell Wilson continues to be held out of 11-on-11, doing some individual work, I think a little bit of 7-on-7 stuff, but not getting the full workload, which has kind of cracked the door open for Justin Fields. If you read the reports and you watch some of the clips or whatever, people are raving about Fields at Steelers camp. We know that that's just training camp. We don't want to buy too much into training camp noise, but the noise keeps getting louder and louder. And Tomlin, they haven't come out and said that this is a quarterback competition. I don't think that they're tracking this day to day like maybe the fan base is, but it feels like something interesting is brewing in Steelers camp.
Yeah, I mean, look, one thing we know about Fields, the preseason, when he gets in there, he's going to use his athleticism. The game's going to be real simple. It's going to be slowed down. So it's a hard thing to judge. Practice, obviously, is better for him, and we'll see what they do against certain teams. I think, to me, that's going to be the key. And where is Wilson? I mean, because, look, as much as I'm not in love with Fields, there's no love for Wilson either here now. One thing about Wilson, he protected the football. They were 7th in the league last year and not turning the ball over. That's what he did. He didn't make plays down the field. Whereas if Fields can make some plays, but if he turns the ball over, Tomlin's going to get him out of the game. They're just not going to let him play. But there's enough plays that he can make with his feet that I think, to me, you got to pay attention to that.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and then the preseason could be catered to him to show off some of that athleticism, but he's got to limit the fumbles were just absolute killers last year for the Chicago Bears, and some of the Broncos game against Russell Wilson is the one that comes to mind when you think about some of the taking care of the football, a game that the Bears probably should have won, but some of those fumbles ended up swinging it in favor of Denver. Speaking of those Broncos, Bo Nix continues to get more and more work with the first team offense. There was talks about Jarrett Stidham maybe pushing Bo Nix. We know Sean Payton went out and signed Stidham early in free agency a couple of years ago. Zach Wilson, it feels like he's a distant third in this conversation, but it feels like Bo Nix might be kind of grabbing a hold of this starting quarterback job for the Denver Broncos. It might be their week one guy, should be their week one guy as a rookie.
Yeah, I mean, I fully expect that to happen because I think Sean's fully invested in this. Sean's he wants to get on with it. That's why, the question about what's Tennessee doing with bringing in so many, where are we going? I think Sean knows exactly where he's going at the quarterback position. Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're going to do. And we're going to grow with them. And I'm going to limit him from hurting us. I think that's the difference. Is the play caller, he's going to limit him from hurting the team and understanding what he's good at doing and what he's not good at doing.
Yeah, it should be the Bo Nix show in Denver. Get out there. Sean Payton said that this is the quarterback he's wanted. He pounded the table for him. I think he'll be out there. In Minnesota, it's going to be Sam Darnold, right? Unless you're hearing anything that's otherwise, it's McCarthy. It sounds
I haven't
like
heard anything. It's going to be interesting to see. I mean, you see these clips on Twitter. Oh, look at J.J. McCarthy. But, the guy's holding the ball 5 seconds. It's like some of these clips that the people put out there they're saying they're great. Yeah, I mean, it's just so bad.
Yeah, that's the stuff that, from watching Cowboys camp on Friday and Saturday, even sometimes it would happen with Dak, maybe the coverage would win, but he would hold the ball because the whistle hasn't blown, roll out to the right, and then find a guy, and people are cheering yeah! It's like, guys, that's a win for the defense. It's not like the offense, even though it was a completed pass or whatever. You have to understand the context of what's happening at some of these training camps, which sometimes some of these aggregators.
But you were able to see. I mean, you saw all that.
100%.
I love your notes.
We were able to see it. I said said, I'm not going to record any of this stuff. I'm not going to be the guy that's putting stuff out there to then put on social media so all these NFL aggregator sites can go ahead and do it. I just want to see it for my own eyeballs, get my own thoughts, put them together, and then we'll go from there. But it was a fun time out at Dallas Cowboys training camp. We're going to make it an annual tradition, my dad, my brother, and I, and then we'll be out there every single year. It's going to be a fun time for the Abebefe men to go out there and check out the Dallas Cowboys. But that does it for this edition of the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. As always, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. YouTube audience, continue to like, continue to comment. We appreciate all the engagement on our YouTube videos. Thursday's coming up. We'll have 2 more games. We'll get to see Drake May, Michael, on Thursday night for the New England Patriots. That'll be interesting. I'm sure everyone will be rational with their opinions after Drake May makes his preseason debut. But that's going to be a whole lot of fun. Until then, man, I'll see you on Thursday.
See you Thursday, Femi. Thank you.